Hello and welcome to the mobilegamer.biz digest. I'm Neil Long and every week I go for a walk and tell you what's happening in the mobile games business. Here we go. You may have seen reports on the biggest media merger potentially ever involving Netflix, Paramount and Warner Brothers. This is very much a developing story, but as it stands, Netflix has proposed a $72 billion acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery technically, and that bid has been approved. Paramount would like to pay more, over $100 billion, and that bid is backed by Paramount and a bunch of extra American investors. The Paramount bid is unsolicited, but money talks, so Warner's shareholders may well accept. But let's not get bogged down by that. For the mobile game industry audience, the most relevant thing is what happens now to Warner Brothers' portfolio of mobile games and all of the licensed titles it has, which are made by partners like Scopely, Jam City, and most of all, Zynga. Zynga has several pretty big titles using Warner licenses, and also Fun Plus has DC Dark Legion. So I broke all that down on Monday in a piece called "The Mobile Games Caught Up in That Potential Netflix Warner Brothers Deal," and obviously you should read the article. But looking at the last 30 days worth of in-app purchase revenue among Warner Brothers sort of self-published titles, Game of Thrones Conquest is by far the biggest title in that portfolio. $1.5 million earned in the last 30 days, according to App Magic estimates. All of these numbers are App Magic. Second, Mortal Kombat, $890K in the last 30 days. And then the rest, heads up, DC Worlds Collide, Injustice 2, 600k, 600k and 400k respectively. Not going gangbusters, those games, but steady earners. Outside of that, you've got some legacy titles that aren't doing particularly well. Game of Thrones, Dragonfire, not a game I'm familiar with, but given the license, that doesn't seem to be doing too well. And I conclude, after looking at those numbers, that it's hard to see a long-term future for those games within Netflix. They don't really fit into the Netflix strategy, and especially those games earning under $500,000 a month. This stuff is really a rounding error for Netflix, and it has said so, really. It has come out since that Netflix co-CEO Greg Peters did not even consider the games arm in the valuation of Warner Brothers when making the bid, so that doesn't bode well either. And then you got the licensed games. Jam City's Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, $2.4 million earned in the last 30 days. That, you would imagine, will stick around. Game of Thrones Slots Casino from Zynga, that's also doing about $2.3 million every month. As I say in the article, you would imagine there are licensing agreements in place for those titles. And if Netflix does succeed in buying Warner, the survival of those titles would depend on how long those contracts last for. And if Netflix wants to maintain that kind of money coming in for relatively little effort. The thing about these giant tech and media companies is that $2.4 million a month may not be enough, depending on internal bean counting. So there's also Harry Potter Puzzles and Spells from Zynga. It's about $2 million a month for that one. Game of Thrones Legends RPG, another Zynga one, about $1 million a month for that one. Fun Plus only just launched DC Dark Legion, $2.3 million in the last 30 days earned on that one. So all of those games could now be at risk of either closure or just effectively being soft sunsetted and slowly fading away, as lots of mobile games do. But the big but is this Netflix deal, this Paramount deal for Warner still has a long way to run. Even if the Netflix deal goes ahead as planned, it'll take probably a year to 18 months to fully complete, and things may change in the meantime. But that is the lay of the land right now. I thought that was worth doing, even though there are lots of uncertainties around. And I didn't really put it in the article, but it is notable that a company like Warner with IP like Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, all of the various DC licenses, like lots of other big legacy media companies, just have not fulfilled their potential in mobiles. These are great IPs that most game makers would bend over backwards to use. The PC and console games, which have been getting a lot of the attention online, as ever. Rocksteady hasn't got a great record recently after all those Batman games, which were very successful. Mortal Kombat ticks along fine, but yes, yet more uncertainty around an acquisition for lots of people working in games, and there will be further twists and turns. The topic of Game Awards. Many of my peers are flying out to LA this week, going to the Game Awards. I think there's one mobile game category in the Game Awards, and it doesn't seem to be that representative of what's actually going on in the mobile game business. And there's also the BAFTAs. The BAFTA long list of games for the BAFTA Game Awards 2026 came out this week. I quickly scanned through it, and there are 3 games out of 64 on the long list that are mobile games. And I think maybe it's worth repeating that there are a few people out there on LinkedIn with their hot takes saying mobile gets ignored in these things and questioning why, given the importance of the business and the huge downloads and huge revenue that mobile games generate. I would argue that these awards shows are about cultural importance and cultural influence, and it is hard to argue that mobile games have the same level of cultural influence and inspire fandoms in the same way that a game like Clair Obscur, which seems set to sweep up at the Game Awards, and it's worth facing up to that and questioning why. And I think the reason why is because mobile games take a more scientific view of its players. Really, the order of the day is keeping players retained and monetizing them, while of course offering them daily bite-sized nuggets of fun. But it's hard to argue that a game like Monopoly Go, wild success, hundreds of millions of downloads, billions in revenue, but has it made any cultural impact at all? I would argue no. There's no characters, there's no story. That Mr. Money guy, whatever he's called, I guess he is a character, but I don't even know what he's called. And Monopoly is a world-renowned brand. So, yes, mobile games should be represented at these awards, but it is really down to the judges, and these are not business awards. These are player awards and cultural impact awards. And that is why you don't really see mobile games represented in the Game Awards or at BAFTA. It honestly doesn't matter how much money a game makes. If it's making no cultural impact at all, it's not going to get any awards in these types of events. You could say something like the Avatar films are similar in that they are a big media property, incredibly financially successful, but in terms of cultural impact, those films make surprisingly little contribution to cultural life. I once compared mobile games to Mrs. Brown's Boys, which is a TV show constantly slammed by critics, and yet one of the most popular shows the BBC has ever created. So there is always a disconnect between what critics like and what players like and what is successful in terms of business, and that's okay. We don't need to force commercial success into culturally driven awards like this. The two things can be separate, and that's okay. You are halfway through the podcast. Here is a commercial break. I'll be back after this.
Xsolla connects developers with the resources they need to build, fund, launch, and monetize their mobile games globally. With Xsolla Web Shop, sell virtual items, in-game currency, subscriptions, and custom offers directly to players while driving up to 5 times the revenue growth. With the industry's #1 web shop solution, Xsolla provides the tools for developers to focus on what's most important: creating great games. Visit Xsolla.com to learn more. That's XSOLLA.com.
Also this week, I have noticed a big increase in the number of mobile game ads I'm getting served on TikTok every day. So I wrote an article about it. This is a quick look at the interesting, weird, cynical, sometimes funny ways mobile game companies try and hook you in. And the ones I am getting served the most are Kingshot, Paramount Survival, X-Clash, All in Whole, Dark War Survival, and Tiles Survive. I don't know what that says about me and my algorithm, but I guess you could say all of those games, apart from maybe All in Whole and Tiles Survive, are kind of dad games, strategy games. I've noticed a big increase in the number I'm getting served on TikTok lately, which is probably the #1 platform in terms of media consumption in the world right now. I would have to check that, but I would imagine it's up there with YouTube and perhaps doesn't get the press it deserves. I certainly watch more TikTok than I do any other media platform. And I think the way mobile game companies try and get you into these games is interesting. Starting with Kingshot, they've taken this organic trend of people doing impossible things, throwing balls into small containers. There's an acrobat guy called Jacob who keeps coming up in my algorithm who does impossible things or unlikely things. And one of the creatives for Kingshot does that. It's a guy sitting on his stairs throwing balls into a little container, which segues into the more traditional Kingshot gameplay footage where the king on horseback is going around shooting guys. There's also Paramount Survival, which I've covered before as having some pretty outlandish ways to get your attention. With this one, it's sawing off a Palmon's tail, stabbing a guy in the eye, and then switching to some gameplay which is not particularly representative of the actual game. All pretty standard stuff if you are particularly a Chinese-made mobile game. All in Whole goes down the innuendo route and milks the putting large things in your hole kind of theme. Not gonna lie, it's quite funny. And X-Clash, one of the weirder games out there, as before, starts off as draw lines around the thing to save it from the bees. Previously, it was a Doge character. Now it's a little cartoon guy. I don't know if he's from some meme, but these ads are now soundtracked by a sort of odd Chinese version of Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And then there's Zombie Waves, which is relatively old-fashioned. It's got a guy running through blue gates, but then he leaps up and with what looks like Thor's hammer smashes down into a crowd of zombies led by a zombie bride. There's more relaxing creatives out there as well. I'm also getting served Dark War Survival ads, which are kind of post-apocalyptic dioramas, but also Studio Ghibli. So I assume there's some sort of AI element there because it leans on those Studio Ghibli AI images that were doing the rounds among AI people a few months back. And there's also Tiles Survive, which is slightly more peaceful as well. Pixel art dioramas, gentle plinky plonky music. So I think the latter two prove that you don't have to do shock tactics when you are doing TikTok ad creatives. There are other ways to get attention, and actually with 95% of the feed based on 1 or 2 second long hooks, having a gentle plinky plonky piano music ad creative is actually quite striking. So this category of article, I don't do them very often, and actually they don't get that many readers, but I think it's interesting and important given how much marketing drives the mobile business. I might turn this into a series, I might not. We shall see, but let me know if you find these interesting, if I'm getting the wrong end of the stick. Either way, I think they're fun. In this week's Data Digest, there's an exclusive in there. I haven't seen anyone else cover it just yet. Anyway, Jam City got fined $1.6 million by a court in California for violating privacy laws. It failed to offer opt-outs for selling player information, so they've been dinged $1.6 million. Sensor Tower's charts for November: Last War, top of the revenue charts; Block Blast, top of the download charts. Global consumer spending on mobile games across the App Store and Google Play reached $6.68 billion in November. According to Sensor Tower, that's 2.8% down month on month. On downloads, 3.62 billion in November, down 4.1% month on month. Little Farm Story Idle Tycoon, a hybrid casual game from Say Games, is actually generating a decent amount of in-app purchase revenue, 1.2 million in October, on top of its ads. And there's a little breakdown from App Magic on the top 10 first purchases in that game, which is interesting. Not a thing I've seen broken down before. Budge Studios, the kids game specialist, 2 billion downloads over its lifetime. It has been going for 15 years now, founded in Montreal, Canada. Royale, also celebrating a birthday. 5 years of that game, $470 million earned. Huuuge Games, 35% of its revenue is coming through direct-to-consumer channels. Brain Test, I included this Unico figure because there are loads of companies like this who often you've never heard of, but they've got 1.6 billion downloads. It's a company called Unico. It makes those brain test games. Lifetime downloads for its portfolio, 1.6 billion downloads. More than triple the 500 million it reported back in April 2022. The brain test games alone have topped 750 million downloads, which is a lot. And there's more numbers from Unico partners on the Asia and MENA market. 89 billion. That market is expected to generate 89 billion this year. That's up a little bit from the 87.9 billion it previously forecasted. And it expects the market to grow even further to 99.6 billion in 2029. Now, we're coming towards the end of the year. There's going to be some wrap-up type stuff happening on the site over the next few weeks. And then we're into January and we do predictions. So look forward to that. If you want to contribute, drop me a line on neil@mobilegamer.biz. Things really are slowing down now, and I quite like it, actually. I don't really like being at the mercy of the news cycle. So I hope you're winding down ahead of Christmas too. Thanks very much. I'll be back next week. Goodbye.